Hello, my name is Mike Lichtart and I'm an assistant professor at the Social AI Lab at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And I will be talking about the why, how and effects of social robots in primary education. And the context of this project is math education, but the lessons we learned apply to education robotics in a much broader sense. So let's start with why. When taking a social constructivist approach, learning is viewed as an inherently shared and social process where the teacher-student relationship is key for successful learning. And this has been demonstrated with artificial teachers as well. Yes, it matters how the social behaviors of the robot are used. There is work that shows that just adding a social robot to an educational task can actually distract children from learning. That's why we work with a more direct approach, where the educational task is interwoven or part of a social dialogue with the robot. And turns out this really engages children to do math with the robot, especially when these dialogues are personalized. And if you're more interested to learn more about this, I would like to refer you to our paper called Design Specifications for a Social Robot Math Tutor, which I presented at HRI last year. The big question for today, however, is how sustainable is this approach? For the robot to truly contribute to learning, recurring sessions are necessary, and we know that after a few sessions with the robot, the novelty effect wears off, and so does children's interest to do math with the robot. And this is, of course, a universal question in HRI. From prior work in a non-educational setting, we know that turning the robot into a story character, creating a story world around it, and infusing the dialogue with narrative development, and above all, enable children to form a parasocial relationship with this character, much like characters in books and TV shows, or even more closely, video games. We know that they are more willing and interested to continue interacting with this robot over time. And does this also work in an educational context, is our question. And are children more willing to keep doing math with the robot with this strategy? To answer that question, first let us look at the how. We employ a social personalization strategy that includes asking children about their hobbies, interests, and preferences, and reciprocating these self-disclosures with equivalent robot anecdotes from the story world that we created. And these questions, the answers to these questions are stored and then referred back to in future conversations, and we call them memory references. And additionally, the robot uses this information about the child to select math dialogues that match with the interests and hobbies of the child. And from prior work in a non-educational setting, we know that this social personalization approach fosters the child-robot relationship and is able to keep children engaged consistently for at least 5 sessions that last about 20 minutes, spanning a 2-month period. And while at the same time, without social personalization, a less stronger bond is formed and children's willingness to interact decreased after each session, with a significant difference starting after the 4th and 5th session. So it takes a while to really benefit from the added value of social personalization. So unfortunately, our first study that included 130 children, we weren't able to facilitate more than 3 sessions, and we indeed not find any effect of social personalization on the math tutoring. I wouldn't be here if this was the end of the story, and we went back to the same 6 schools after 9 months, recruited the same participants, well, at least we were able to recruit 113 of them for a follow-up study. And this time, unfortunately, we could only facilitate 1 session, but we considered this the 4th session just 9 months later. You could argue this is bad study design. We, on the other hand, would like to argue that this provides an excellent opportunity to study the effects of such a long break between interactions on the child-robot relationship that was established during the first sessions. And breaks are to be expected in application context and in schools especially. Think of holidays, lack of time of teachers, lengthy malfunctions, etc. So would a sizable gap between interactions undo the effects of our social personalization strategy, or is a strategy up for the task? Let's find out, shall we? We did help the robot to bridge the gap a bit. And because children went up a grade, we extended our math module with contents of the new curriculum. But more importantly, we included a getting reacquainted moment. The robot would select 5 interests and hobbies it knows about the child and ask about them. For example, "Hey Mike, nice to see you again. Still playing football? How is that going?" Etc. And during the greeting, there was also, and if you're familiar with our work, you know about this, a secret handshake that children can co-create with the robot during the first session. The key design principle here was to instill children with a feeling of being remembered by the robot. And in the control condition, the robot acknowledges this is not the first time they meet. It says, hey, nice to meet you again, without recalling a name or any interest. And instead, the robot talks about its love for math. Now let's look at our main findings. The two box plots on the left represent the aggregated relationship scores with and without social personalization. So on the left side, the purple one is with, and on the right side with the green one, that's without social personalization. Our relationship measure includes concepts like feeling of relatedness and the willingness to continue interacting. And as discussed, the differences after the first 3 sessions were not statistically significant. On the right, we have the two box plots representing the scores after the 4th session with and without personalization. And the differences between them is statistically significant. Although not clearly visible in this graph, the relationship scores in both conditions did significantly decline over time. This was only slightly so in the personalization condition and much more steeper in the control condition. And we found the exact same results in a prior study in the non-educational context that consisted of these 5 sessions but didn't have this big break. This time we looked more closely at what aspects of social personalization contributed to this effect. And in our paper you can find a more extensive breakdown of this, but for now let's look at 2 highlights. Perceiving the memory references modulates the effect of social personalization. So only when children explicitly notice the robot making these memory references does it contribute to the relationship formation and task adherence. So don't be too subtle. The social personalization indeed made children feel more remembered by the robot, and children who felt more remembered by the robot bonded more strongly and were more willing to do math with the robot. The majority of children indicated in the personalization condition that the reacquainted moment was the main contributor of them feeling remembered, especially the summary of interest, recalling their name, and displaying the secret handshake. Our work contributes in the following way. It replicates prior research in a different setting, both strengthening the validation of our social personalization approach as well as increasing its practical value. The social personalization strategy is also effective in an educational context by contributing to the long-term adherence of an educational task, demonstrating another value of educational social robots. We learned that the amount of exposure, instead of the time passed, is a more important factor for the novelty effect to dissipate and interest to falter. And finally, we learned that giving children the feeling of being remembered really contributes to sustaining the child-robot relationship after the break, and that memory references and an explicit, dedicated getting reacquainted moment in particular is a way to give children that feeling. This is all my time. Please reach out if you have any questions or want to help access our open source resources. My name is Mike Lichthart, and thank you for your attention.